Christian historian and biblical scholar Wesley Huff, more famously known as Wes Huff, or as I would like to call him, Uncle Wes, got on the Joe Rogan podcast for a conversation on the reliability of the scriptures. That is, how can we trust that the Bible we have today is an accurate record of what actually took place in the ancient times? This interview comes off the back of the quote-unquote debate Uncle Wes had with Uncle Billy, and I promise you, Ixe, it did not look good for Uncle Billy.
Most of that is oral history, correct?
Oh, it's all oral history, even the Bible.
So when we're engaging with oral history, what methodologies are you using to confirm that the orality is accurate?
Oh, man.
So, in this video, I want us to go over 3 historical insights discussed on this podcast that I think is important for us to think about entering 2025. Trust me, brah, this is intriguing. Awe.
The search for our origins is one of the most human endeavors. One of the most, because to know that we are particularly unique. We're so different. We stand out from every other animal on this planet. And there's this crazy, wild war of biology where life is just eating life all around us. And we just got to some crazy place that far beyond any other creature that's on this planet.
Yeah.
And we did it in a bunch of different ways. We did it in a bunch of different ways all over the place with different scribbles and different icons and different gods and different things. And we're all wondering, like, which one, where did it start? What was the origin of all this? Like, what was the need to write these things down? What purpose did it serve to have these myths and legends and stories? Like, was it just to keep society together, or was it to retell a very important story that was a very unique thing that happened at the dawn of time?
And that's why you see, I mean, the literary comparison of ancient Near Eastern origin stories is like a really interesting thing to do. Because when you look at something like the Enuma Elish, which was the Babylonian creation story, and then you look at something like Genesis chapter 1, there are obvious crossovers with, like I said before, these ancient Near Eastern conventions. But then you can see that the author of Genesis is making these points that are actually rebutting something like the origin stories of the surrounding cultures that largely believe that matter is like eternal and the gods come out of the created world, and that there's this narrative of the battle that takes place where some gods fight against other gods, and the world around us that we see and like human beings are the end result of this battle. And so they would read this on every Babylonian New Year. And one of the main themes was basically that, like, it's all chance. It's all a random mistake. You were created without purpose and intention because Tiamat gets destroyed. And she's the god that, you know, you come from. And then you read Genesis chapter 1 and it says, in the beginning, God creates the heavens and the earth, and he makes it good. And there's this idea that, like, that's countercultural in the idea that the Babylonians did not think that the world was good. And that, like, at the end of every refrain, it's good, it's good, it's good, it's good, and then it's very good at the end. And that humanity in particular is created in the image of God. Like, that's a very, not just like kings, which a lot of ancient Near Eastern cultures believe that kings were created in the image of God, but that humanity in general is created in the image of God. And this idea of the Imago Dei, that that's why you're different. Like, why are you different from all the animals? Because you're given something that exemplifies of a unique quality. And then the ancient Near Eastern cultures that believe that, you know, the planets are gods and that the sea is a god. And then Genesis chapter 1 looks at that and it kind of subverts the expectations of the day in getting to this ultimate question of, you know, why are we here? What are we supposed to do while we're here, and how do we get out of here? And it says that, no, there's purpose, there's meaning, there's intention. And actually, a lot of the things that you worship, it's pretty stupid because God created them.
Okay, this is just incredible. So what Wes is basically telling Joe Rogan is that the first few chapters of Genesis is basically a rebuttal to the other belief systems that existed at that time about the origins of mankind. Where do we come from? How we got here? And why are we here, right? Many ancient civilizations believe that God is a part of the universe and that there are many gods. They believe that everything is an accident, including mankind. They believe that only certain people and persons are special or favored by the gods, right? More than others. And the rest of us are basically just slaves. And if you think about it, it's low-key the new age stuff your girlfriend probably believes in today. But when we look at the book of Genesis, the narrative is different. That God is the creator of the universe and everything in it. That God created mankind on purpose, and for what reason? To multiply, fill the earth, and subdue it. God created all of mankind to be his representatives here on earth. And that's the difference with the book of Genesis. Okay, now the second insight was really an eye-opener for me. Like, this really changed how I felt about the New Testament altogether, right? Like, it's really a game changer. So yeah, have a look.
But imagine how crazy that is. That something in a time where there's no printed press and something that had been passed on for so long as an oral tradition is exact word for word written. You find in a cave in Qumran.
Yeah.
And then the same thing you get in the English translation of the Bible today. That's nuts.
Yeah. I mean, up until the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, the New Testament manuscripts predated the Old Testament manuscripts by a long shot.
Really?
Yeah. Because the Christians were less discerning in their proliferation of written documents. So the Jews had this whole system where you had to be a trained scribe, and they were very, very careful with procedures that you went through. Whereas the Christians were like, we want to get this thing out as fast as we can, as often as we can, which had a lot of benefits in that, like, their goal was a proselytization and evangelism, and that worked. But the downside of it was that you get really messy copies, where you have copies all over the place, but human error gets involved with, like, spelling differences and, additions, deletions, mostly for completely, like, understandable reasons. But we actually have manuscripts where we know the person copied it and they didn't know how to read it because they make mistakes that you wouldn't make if you knew how to copy. There's this really great example of a guy who copies, I believe it's the genealogy of Matthew, and he's looking at a manuscript that has 2 columns, and he's copying it from left to right, and he's copying it like this, whereas it's like the column you go down and then the next column. So in the genealogy of Jesus, he's got all the wrong people getting all the wrong people. Oh. And you're like, you wouldn't do this if you knew how to read, because God is in the middle of the genealogy. So, like, that kind of thing.
That is a real problem.
That is a real problem. But ironically, with the Christian manuscripts, because we have so many, it's actually because of the mistakes that we're able to trace the text back with a high degree of confidence. Because if you have copies that are floating around, North Africa and places like Egypt, and then you have copies in Syria, and you have copies out into Asia and into Europe and the British Isles, when mistakes pop up, they're geographically located. And because you have so many, you can compare and contrast them and figure out, okay, well, this obviously happened here at this time, and you can pinpoint those things. So this is a field called textual criticism, where we do this with all ancient documents. Like, the Bible is a more kind of fleshed out field of textual criticism because we have so many manuscripts. But we do it with, Marcus Aurelius. We even do it with Shakespeare with the different copies. Because if you only have one copy, you have to trust that the person who copied that got it right.
Right.
Yeah.
Bars. See, so here's the thing there. People generally argue that because we don't have the original first copy of the New Testament, then that means we can't trust it, right? Because we only have copies upon copies. But according to what Wes is saying, because we have so many copies, it helps us preserve the original copy even better. Think about it this way. If I had the original, what could I do with it? I could change it, right? It's like it's giving Joseph Smith. But if I had a copy and 10 of you had a copy as well, and I changed my copy, wouldn't it be easier to expose me as the liar? You get me, fam? So it's low-key kind of genius, if you think about it that way. Now, the last insight or the last question Joe Rogan asks is the big one, right? Like, this is pretty much, towards the end of the podcast and pretty much the climax of the podcast, in my opinion. So let's have a look.
It's very difficult for anybody who thinks of themselves as an intelligent person who's secular to even entertain the possibility that someone died and come back to life.
And I get that. But we've already talked about the fact that we don't think that the only thing that exists is matter and motion. We as in you and I, right? Like, we believe that there's something else going on in this world that's a little bit crazy.
There's something else.
And that to, I think, exclude that, I think excludes something that you're kind of putting blinders on. For. And you do have, you're right in terms of all of these ancient conventions and the ways that things were spread around. But the Gospels are written in the lifetime of the eyewitnesses. And they're written in this period of time where you have groups of individuals who could have fact-checked those things. So,
how do you fact-check someone coming back from the dead?
Well, how
many people saw his body, right?
Well, Paul says that 400 people saw him all at once.
400 people saw the crucifixion?
No, saw the resurrected Jesus. Yeah, 1 Corinthians 15, Paul says that Jesus appeared to the disciples, and then he appeared to 400 people all at once. If we read the Gospel of Luke and the Gospel of Luke and Acts, so same author wrote these both documents, he says that Jesus was walking around teaching them for 40 days after he was resurrected from the dead. And so these are written within a time period when you have people who would have seen Jesus' ministry who were there, say at something like the feeding of the 5,000, who could have been able to verify or debunk some of these things that are being said. And you go from a bunch of scared guys who, because Jesus wasn't the only messianic figure who arose and claimed to be the Messiah.
Right.
There were a number of individuals both prior to and after Jesus, but they die and the movement dies with them.
Do you think it's possible that he didn't die? And do you think it's possible that they thought he was dead?
Yeah, I mean, we know a lot about Roman crucifixion. And we
Pretty
know
brutal.
that, and we know that they did their job well.
Yeah.
And so, in fact, if you look at, say, very skeptical biblical scholars, like non-believing, atheist, agnostic Christian scholars, they will say if we can know anything about Jesus, like they'll cast a doubt on a lot of the things that we read about in the Gospels in terms of the actual historical Jesus of Nazareth. They'll say one thing we can be sure of is that he died by crucifixion under Pontius Pilate. The chances of Jesus surviving the crucifixion, I think, are narrow to none. And the chance of him appearing 3 days later completely fine. I mean, if the first thing you do, if you survive a crucifixion and then you go and you find your disciples, the first thing you say is not, peace be with you. It's get me to a hospital.
Now, the reason why the resurrection is so important, so paramount to the Christian faith is because if Jesus did not resurrect literally, then this whole Christianity thing falls flat. Like, it is completely useless. But here's the thing, when you look at the historical evidence to back up this Christian claim, it's quite remarkable. History tells us that Jesus lived and was crucified, he was buried, and a few days later his tomb was found empty. Sometime after, the same disciple who ran away when Jesus got killed came out of hiding and said that he appeared to them alive, and they went to their deaths believing so. And apparently Jesus appeared to more than just his 12 followers. He appeared to Paul, James, 500 people at once. He didn't just appear in a concentrated area, but across different locations. I mean, the list goes on, hence birthing Christianity. And that, to me, is quite intriguing. And if you're interested in the big question of Christianity, did Jesus resurrect? Click this video on the right. Otherwise, check out this other video YouTube is suggesting to you. And yeah, remember to like, subscribe. I appreciate it. It really helps us out. Away.